Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into the origins of the Wunderwaffe program. Picture the closing years of the Second World War. The map is bleeding red on every front, factories groan without fuel, and the night sky over Germany flickers with Allied bombers. When a regime feels the ground slipping under its feet, what does it reach for? Not modest reforms, not incremental fixes. It reaches for miracles. And in German, the word for that was Wunderwaffe, the wonder weapon. Even the name feels like a promise written in smoke. Let's set the stage clearly. Late war crisis was not a mood. It was a measurable reality. Oil shipments strangled, rail lines shattered, and industrial centers pounded again and again. Skilled workers were drafted or dead. Supply chains buckled. Imagine trying to build cutting-edge technology when your copper is rationed, your rubber is synthetic, and your cities keep catching fire. In that environment, every conventional solution looked too slow. So leaders began to ask a dangerous question: if ordinary tools cannot win, what about extraordinary ones? Enter the SS and its appetite for unconventional science. Heinrich Himmler, a man with a bureaucrat's obsession and a mystic's taste for the dramatic, pushed research divisions to explore ideas that sat well outside mainstream physics and engineering. Why? Partly ideology, partly desperation. Secrecy became both a shield and a drug. The more outlandish the proposal, the more it needed isolation, code names, and concrete. And the deeper it went underground, the more it seemed to promise. Have you noticed how secrecy can make any claim feel bigger than it is? In an authoritarian system, prestige and proximity to power often matter more than peer review. If a project could whisper the word decisive, doors opened. Now think about place. Ideas need laboratories, and laboratories need geography. Key strategic sites grew like roots through the mountains and mines of Lower Silesia. You will hear names like Project Reese and the Wenceslas Mine. These were not cozy university campuses. They were networks of tunnels, reinforced caverns, and hurriedly built halls where engineers and physicists tried to turn theory into steel. Geography did double duty. It hid sensitive work from bomb sites and it projected authority inward, fence perimeters, armed checkpoints, and a culture of silence. If the front lines are collapsing, you pull your bets into the ground and hope the clock will slow. This is the political, military, and technological foundation of the Wunderwaffe mindset. Politically, a centralized leadership could redirect resources with a signature and a threat, even when the spreadsheet screamed no. Militarily, collapsing fronts created a timer that ticked louder every day, rewarding any proposal that claimed to leapfrog conventional limits. Technologically, the promise of breakthroughs seduced otherwise cautious men. High voltage, exotic materials, rotating fields. If it sounded like it could change the terms of the war in one stroke, it earned a code name. But there is a paradox here worth pausing on. The same conditions that accelerate radical projects also distort judgment. When your factories are short of copper and your rail cars are full of rubble, the cost of chasing a miracle is not only money, it is opportunity. Every secret tunnel dug for a speculative device is a tunnel not dug for something proven. Do you see how pressure can twist incentives? Scientists become performers for patrons. Reports become theater. Results become rumors. And rumors, once they escape the wire, become legends. So as we begin, hold three pillars in your mind. First, the late war crisis that made miracles feel necessary. Second, the SS machinery that privileged secrecy and spectacle over transparency and replication. Third, the strategic research sites that turned mountains and mines into laboratories for the extraordinary. With those pillars in place, we can ask a sharper question: when a state chases a wonder weapon in the dark, what exactly gets built, and what simply gets believed? Let's keep that question on the table as we move forward, step by step, with evidence, not just echoes. Now, let's talk about one of the most enduring and controversial legends to emerge from the Wunderwaffe world, Die Glocke, the Nazi bell. Our story here starts not in the 1940s, but in the year 2000. That's when a Polish journalist named Igor Witkowski first brought this tale into the public eye. He claimed to have uncovered the existence of a mysterious wartime project through what he described as Nazi documents and post-war SS testimonies. But here's the thing, none of this had been part of the historical record before. No Allied intelligence memos, no declassified files, just Witkowski's assertions and the sources he claimed to have seen. From the moment it appeared, Die Glocke was already wearing a cloak of mystery. So what was this alleged machine? The descriptions paint an image that's both bizarre and strangely precise. Imagine a massive metallic object, shaped like an oversized bell, the kind you'd see hanging in a cathedral, only far more industrial. Inside, it supposedly contained a strange, violet-hued substance that shimmered like liquid mercury. This material even had a name, Zerum 525. No one could quite agree on what it was, but it's been described as heavy, radioactive, and almost otherworldly. It wasn't just an engine, it was a container for something rare and potentially dangerous. And then there are the alleged abilities. This is where the story leaps from engineering into the realm of science fiction, or perhaps science ahead of its time. Reports claim that Die Glocke could generate anti-gravity effects, bending the very force that holds us to the Earth. Others said it could distort time itself, warping the flow of seconds and minutes within its field. Some accounts even warned of lethal radiation, strong enough to kill anyone nearby during tests. If true, that would place its capabilities far beyond anything contemporary physics could manage, even today. Now, let's take a breath here, because whether or not these claims have any basis in reality, they strike at something very human, the allure of the impossible. If you were in a war you were losing, wouldn't you dream of a single machine that could rewrite the rules of nature? A device that could let you escape the constraints of time, gravity, or distance? In that sense, Die Glocke isn't just a story about a piece of machinery. It's a story about hope, desperation, and the belief that hidden knowledge could save the day. But remember, as compelling as these descriptions are, they are only the beginning of the debate. The real challenge lies in sorting the whispers from the evidence, the testimony from the hard data. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Now we arrive at the part of the story where the bright glow of legend meets the cold light of scrutiny. Because for all the intrigue surrounding Die Glocke, when we look for evidence, the shelves are disturbingly bare. The only direct evidence we have traces back to one man's testimony, that of former SS officer Jacob Sporenberg. According to Witkowski, Sporenberg described the bell during post-war interrogations. But here's the problem. Those supposed statements were never independently verified. No official transcripts, no archive documents that historians can check. We are essentially dealing with second-hand accounts of what someone claims Sporenberg said decades ago. In historical research, that's like trying to navigate a dark forest with a single flickering candle. It's something, but it's nowhere near enough to see the full path. Then there's the lack of documentation, and I mean a complete absence. No technical blueprints, no engineering notes, no project logs, nothing in the vast store of captured Nazi records that explicitly mentions a bell-shaped device filled with mysterious violet liquid. Think about that for a moment. The Nazi regime kept meticulous paperwork on everything from fuel rations to the paint codes for submarine interiors. Yet here, for what would have been a groundbreaking device, the paper trail is a ghost. Either the records were destroyed, never existed, or they've been kept under lock and key far from public view. Finally, let's talk about scientific plausibility. The alleged features of Die Glocke, anti-gravity, time distortion, massive radiation, sound staggering. But could they have been the result of a misunderstanding? Some researchers suggest that what witnesses may have seen were advanced high-voltage or particle physics experiments that were already underway in Germany during the 1940s. Picture towering coils, rotating magnetic fields, and strange electrical discharges in dim underground chambers. To a layperson, that could look like a machine defying gravity. To a trained scientist, it might just be a dangerous but conventional experiment in electromagnetism or nuclear physics. And this is where history gets slippery. When hard evidence is scarce, legends thrive. All it takes is one ambiguous testimony, a few unexplained photographs, or some forgotten wartime facilities, and suddenly speculation grows like vines over the ruins. The question is, are we dealing with a real machine whose records vanished, or a story built on shadows and the human need for mystery? In the next section, we'll see how the trail of Die Glocke doesn't simply vanish after the war. Instead, it takes a sharp turn into the world of secret post-war programs and superpower rivalry. After the war ended, the story of Die Glocke didn't simply fade into obscurity. Instead, it slipped into the murky waters of post-war intelligence operations, where facts and speculation intertwine. And here, two rival powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, play starring roles. First, let's look at Operation Paperclip. This was a real, documented American program that secretly relocated over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians to the United States. We're not talking about mid-level factory workers here. Many were experts in advanced physics, rocketry, aeronautics, people whose wartime projects were years, sometimes decades, ahead of Allied research. These scientists were quietly integrated into American research institutions, military labs, and even NASA. Now, Imagine if Die Glocke had been a real project. Would it have been quietly packed into the same crates and cargo planes that carried VE-2 rocket parts and jet engine prototypes? It's not hard to see how the theory takes root. The Soviets were no less aggressive. On their march into eastern Germany, they seized entire factories, laboratories, and the teams that ran them. They too captured high-value scientists, often along with the physical equipment. This sparked an intense competition between the superpowers, a race not only for nuclear weapons, but for any technology that could tilt the balance of power. If the Bell had been located in territory the Soviets occupied, they would have had every incentive to exploit it, study it, and keep it hidden from the West. Then we have the echoes in aerospace research. In the decades after the war, both the US and USSR pursued projects that, at least conceptually, share DNA with the legends of Die Glocke. Think about experimental propulsion systems, high-energy plasma research, and even early investigations into gravity modification. None of these match the wild claims of time travel or anti-gravity exactly, but they hint at a lineage, the idea that certain speculative wartime concepts may have survived, evolving quietly in the background of Cold War technology programs. Of course, in this foggy overlap between history and conspiracy theory, we have to be cautious. Just because post-war research shares some similarities with the Bell's alleged design doesn't prove they're connected. But from a narrative standpoint, it's easy to see why people believe Die Glocke didn't die in 1945. Whether it ended up in an American desert lab, a Soviet mountain facility, or dismantled piece by piece, its ghost haunts the history of Cold War science. And that brings us to a deeper question: what kind of system produces something like this in the first place? Next, we'll examine how the structure of Nazi scientific research shaped the possibilities and the pitfalls of such radical projects. Let's step back from the mystery of Die Glocke itself and look at the system that might have birthed it, because the way science is organized can be just as important as the science itself. Here, we're talking about the contrast between centralized state science and open, decentralized innovation. In the Nazi system, research didn't thrive in the open sunlight of peer review or marketplace competition. It operated under a rigid hierarchy where directives came from the top, often from men with little scientific training but enormous political power. A minister's favor or the Führer's whim could decide which project got funding, manpower, and rare resources. This meant that ideas were not always chosen because they were the most promising in terms of evidence. They were often chosen because they were the most spectacular, the most politically flattering, or the most ideologically appealing. If you could pitch your concept as a war-winning weapon, you stood a much better chance than if you simply promised incremental improvement. Contrast that with open innovation in a decentralized system. In an open marketplace of ideas, competing teams work on problems simultaneously, driven by curiosity, necessity, or profit. Results are tested publicly, challenged, and refined. Failure is costly, but it's also visible, which helps prevent vast resources from being sunk into dead ends for years without accountability. Under a centralized wartime regime, however, failure can be hidden behind secrecy. Projects can continue not because they're working, but because no one outside the inner circle is allowed to ask hard questions. Think about the incentives here. In an authoritarian, centrally planned system, a scientist's survival might depend on keeping powerful patrons happy, even if that means exaggerating results or bending data. In a decentralized environment, the survival of a project depends on proving its worth to those who can choose to fund or abandon it. One system rewards appearances and loyalty, the other rewards performance and adaptability. So, when we hear about a device like Die Glocke, we have to consider this context. Was it a genuine scientific breakthrough that simply never saw the light of day? Or was it the product of a closed system that encouraged secrecy, spectacle, and, in some cases, chasing impossibilities simply because no one was free to say this won't work? This is the broader lesson behind the legend. Whether or not the Bell was real, the environment that supposedly produced it shows how a centralized state can direct immense resources into highly risky ventures that might produce wonders or waste. And because the failures remain buried in archives or rubble, the successes, real or imagined, are the only stories we're left to tell. Next, we'll explore how secrecy itself shapes the myths we inherit, and how wartime shadows can stretch all the way into modern historical debates. Now, let's talk about secrecy, not just as a security measure, but as a force that can create legends. Because in wartime, secrecy isn't only about keeping information from the enemy, it's also about controlling what your own people see, hear, and believe. During World War II, projects like those under the Wunderwaffe umbrella were buried under layers of classification. Scientists and engineers worked in compartmentalized teams, each knowing only a fraction of the whole picture. Workers might see strange equipment or hear unusual noises, but they wouldn't be told what it was for. And here's where it gets interesting. When you can't explain something, your mind fills in the gaps. A test gone wrong becomes a disaster. A strange glow in a lab becomes proof of exotic physics. Over time, these fragments grow into elaborate stories. Secrecy also changes how history is written. In the absence of documents and open discussion, later generations are left with incomplete records. Into those gaps rush speculation, rumor, and sometimes outright invention. And because no one can check the facts against fully declassified archives, these stories can persist for decades. In some cases, they become more compelling than the truth ever could be. There's a parallel here with the Cold War. Both the US and the Soviet Union cloaked their most advanced research in heavy secrecy, which in turn produced waves of speculation about UFOs, about energy weapons, about mind control experiments. The actual projects were often strange enough, but the combination of classified files and occasional leaks was fertile ground for myth-making. It's a reminder that secrecy doesn't just protect information, it shapes narratives, sometimes for generations. And this raises a moral question: when a state deliberately withholds information, even long after the practical need for secrecy has passed, is it safeguarding security or shaping perception? Wartime secrecy may have been born from necessity, but its long shadow blurs the line between fact and legend. And once a legend like Die Glocke takes hold, it can be almost impossible to separate what was engineered in a laboratory from what was engineered in the imagination. As we move to the final part of this journey, we'll reflect on the unanswered questions, the enduring fascination with the bell, and the lessons its story offers in an age where secrecy and technology still go hand in hand. We've now reached the final reflections, and here's where all the threads come together: the history, the speculation, the science, and the myth. Whether Die Glocke was a real device, a misunderstood experiment, or an elaborate wartime rumor, its story reveals something important about how we approach the past. First, there's the lesson about evidence. History is only as solid as the records we can verify. In the case of Die Glocke, the absence of blueprints, lab reports, or multiple independent testimonies leaves us in a fog. That doesn't mean the bell could not have existed, but it means we have to be honest about the limits of what we know. Sometimes, the most intellectually honest position is simply to say, the truth is unclear. Second, there's the lesson about innovation under pressure. Centralized, top-down systems can move resources with breathtaking speed, but they can also chase the spectacular at the expense of the practical. Whether the bell was real or not, the very conditions that supposedly produced it, secrecy, political pressure, and a culture of obedience, are conditions that can distort science as much as they can drive it forward. Third, there's the way secrecy and myth-making intertwine. Once a project is shrouded in classification and buried in hidden facilities, it becomes fertile ground for stories that can outlive the people who worked on it. Even now, decades later, the bell survives not in a museum, but in conversations, documentaries, and internet rabbit holes. That says as much about us, our hunger for mystery, our fascination with the unknown, as it does about the Nazis who may or may not have built it. And finally, there's the open question: if such a device had existed, what would it mean for us today? Would it have been quietly dismantled? Would its technology have been absorbed into Cold War programs? Or would it have been so far ahead of its time that even its captors didn't fully understand it? These are the kinds of questions that keep the legend alive, not because we have the answers, but because the answers might change the way we see history itself. If you've enjoyed exploring this strange and captivating corner of history, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden chapters of our past. And if you want to go even deeper, check out my book, History They Tried to Erase. You'll find the link in the description. It's filled with stories like this, where the official record leaves gaps and the truth waits just out of reach. Until next time, keep questioning, keep digging, and remember, the most interesting history is often the kind someone didn't want you to know.